So I've been asked to give the class this morning. I'm by far not the most senior person here. I'm very conscious of the fact that there are many devotees here that are more senior than I am. So I beg your forgiveness for speaking and get your blessings so we can glorify Srila Prabhupada. This is the 40th anniversary, 50th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada leaving India to go to the West on the Jaladuta, because that vessel doesn't exist anymore. I remember going in, I think, 1986, around that time, to one of the dockyards in Calcutta with Jayapataka Swami, and we had heard that the Jaladuta had been decommissioned, and now it was sitting on the docks waiting to be scrapped. So there was some talk at that time that maybe we could buy it. So we had gone there, we saw the Jaladuta. It was like a hulk. Nothing left had been stripped already. So it wasn't practical. We heard they wanted about $60,000 or something. Then we were thinking, well, not only where could we get the money from, but what would we do with the ship? You know, once we had it, you'd have to completely refurbish it, and, you know, you'd have to pay all the docking fees and everything else. Would we take it for a sale, or... So we just had to let it go, and it got scrapped a few months after that. Now, looking back, if we'd have had the money, what a museum that would have made, the Jaladuta. I was supposed to give a Bhagavatam class this morning. I thought it would be nice to talk about Srila Prabhupada as the living Bhagavatam. Yeah, the activities that we read about of the great personalities in the Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita are exactly those that were enacted by Srila Prabhupada himself. In the future, I'm sure there'll be, you know, some kind of Shastra based on Srila Prabhupada's life. Because we already have many memoirs that are coming out now and biographies, and the more we can get out, the better. Because, as we see, we're not getting any younger, as they say. We're not getting older either, but the body is. And in a very short period of time, somebody mentioned to me the other day, we're dying like flies. So next 10 years, 50th anniversary, who will be here? At least in these bodies. So we should do what we can to glorify Prabhupada and pass that information on to as many people as possible, so future generations, they can celebrate these days with full enthusiasm and vigor. So I'm going to speak a little bit about my own personal experiences with Prabhupada here in Vrindavan. But there's one letter that I want to read first, which kind of sets the background for this temple. This is June 28th, 1967. So this is not many weeks after Prabhupada had that very serious heart attack or stroke. He collapsed, he was paralyzed down one side of his body, and he was very, very serious. It was precarious, and Prabhupada actually thought that he might die at that time. As Maharaj mentioned, then he made a decision that he would go back to India, at least for some months, and get some treatment, Ayurvedic treatment here in Vrindavan. But that was not only what was on his mind. And this letter, it's interesting, this is not the first one that refers to what Prabhupada used to call his American house. In the early days, you'll see there's a lot of letters where Prabhupada talks about establishing an American house. And this is one of them. He's writing to Hansadutta and Imavati and Pradyumna and Janardhan, so I guess they were up in Montreal at that time. So he says, I may go back to India for 6 months, as there is a program for construction of an American house for training preachers at Vrindavan. This is really significant. Vrindavan is the only solitary transcendental abode within this universe where Krishna consciousness automatically reveals. It's the only one in the whole universe where Krishna consciousness automatically reveals. Therefore, I have a great hope to train some of my disciples for preaching work, even in my absence. I am now an old man and attacked with serious disease. I may be overcome by death at any moment. Therefore, I wish to leave some trained preachers so they can do the work of Krishna consciousness in the Western world. That is my ambition. So this is the purpose why Prabhupada established this temple here in Vrindavan, of course many others, but especially here. If he was going to die, at least he wanted one place in Vrindavan where his followers could come and be trained up how to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. As he used to say sometimes, that Vrindavan is not your private property. Just sitting down and chanting, he said, and you lick up. He said, that is not our program. Prabhupada had a very graphic way of describing things sometimes. You sit down chanting, lick up. He said, but that's not our program. Our program is to spread the glories of Vrindavan Chandra all over the world. So you worship Vrindavan Chandra in Vrindavan, but you have to spread the glories of the Lord all over the world. And that was, as he says here, that is my ambition. So of course Prabhupada, when he came, not long after he arrived here with Kin and Nanda, Achyutananda came a few weeks after, not long. And this was one of the programs that Prabhupada sat in when he was left here alone practically for several years before ISKCON officially started in late 1970 in India. Achyutananda was here, one or two others were here. And establishing this American house was one of the programs. Achyutananda was going to be the first president of the American house. Of course, things developed better than Prabhupada, I would think, expected. We've heard the story of how we got the land. And then there was so much hard work and austerity involved in building this temple. If anybody's read the new book about Jamuna Devi, fantastic book, I mean, highly recommended. She describes, you know, from her personal experiences, all the austerities that they had to go through to build this temple. It was not very easy whatsoever. And consequently, when the temple was opened in 1975, it became one of Prabhupada's main preoccupations in figuring out how to manage this place, or train his disciples how to manage this place properly so that it wouldn't deteriorate. So in 1975, the temple was opened. Prabhupada left. He went touring for a little while, and then at the beginning of August, then he came back. Actually, he was in America. He had gotten an opportunity to personally meet with Indira Gandhi, and so he cancelled all of his tour and flew straight back to India. Then from Delhi, he came for about 3 weeks for the Janmashtami period through Radhastami. So my own personal situation, for me, 1975 was the most auspicious year of my whole life, even before then and afterwards also. It was the first year that I came to India, because we went to Mayapur, so it was my first trip there. We went down to Hyderabad, then we came up here for the temple opening here. So it was the first visit to Vrindavan. We were here for the opening of the temple. And then later on, when I went back to Australia, I couldn't settle. And after a couple of months, I just had a very firm determination. I had to come back to Vrindavan. So I came back just early August. I remember the day that I arrived in Delhi was the same day that Prabhupada was going to meet Indira Gandhi. And Bhavananda was there at the Delhi temple. Tejas Prabhu was there. I remember Bhavananda trying to persuade me that, no, don't go to Vrindavan, go to Mayapur. So there's a bit of rivalry there. But I had it firmly fixed in my mind that I should come to Vrindavan. And I think which was, as was fairly standard, in those days we had so little manpower that when I arrived, I had taken the train from Delhi, got down at Mathura, took a Tunga. Shyamlal Prabhu was with me. We met at the railway station. And we came by Tunga to the front gate here. And as I was getting off and unloading my luggage, one Australian devotee, back to Richard, who had been left behind to help, with the temple staffing after the Gaur-Purnima festival, he just happened to be walking out the front gate. I'd been writing to him, telling him that I thought I would probably come to Vrindavan, and he was the first person that I walked into as I got off the Tunga. So back to Richard, jumped up in the air, hugged me, and he grabbed me and he said, "Come with me." And he took me straight into the temple president's office. I literally stepped off the Tunga. That was a Kayananda Maharaj. Back to Richard, who later became Bhagavata Shraya. He said, "I found our new temple commander." And that was it. I was instantly appointed the temple commander. And, I just stepped in the place. I had no idea what was going on, how India worked or anything else. But now I was the temple commander. In those days, if you came to India, you could get really quick promotions. Temple commander, head pujari, temple president, that was the next thing. Gopal Krishna Maharaj, after a couple of months, decided that I would be a good temple president for Calcutta. So, it was bizarre in some ways. But at the same time, it was an opportunity to make a lot of advancement, and we were very much aware that coming to Vrindavan was the chance. So I got the chance to do some service, in the course of which that attracted Srila Prabhupada's attention, not favorably, at least not at the beginning. As I mentioned, Prabhupada came back then from Delhi just a few days after I'd been made the temple commander, and he stayed for 3 weeks. So one of my duties as the temple commander was to make sure that everybody attended Mangalarati. Prabhupada wanted a very high standard. He had actually, when the temple was open and everybody was getting ready to go back to the West, they knew they had insufficient manpower, so 2 men from each zone was ordered to stay behind and not go back. In Australia, we had back to Richard and Purnachandra Prabhu. They would, all right, give us your ticket. That was it. You're staying in India. And especially Commonwealth citizens, we didn't need visas at that time. So Bhagavata Shraya was here, just lost the thread. What was I saying? Yeah, Prabhupada came for 3 weeks. And so I had this really kind of crazy schedule as the temple commander. So in the morning time, I would get up, or I was already up actually. The temple commander's duties were mainly cleaning, making sure everything was clean, making sure that the 24-hour kirtan was going on. That was my duty. And, making sure everybody had proper engagement. So I had this schedule where in the morning time I would give everybody their services about 9 o'clock. And for a couple of hours, I'd detail everything. Then I'd go and take rest for 2 hours. I'd get up, have lunch, come and clean the temple. And then in the evening time, I'd go and take another 2 hours rest at the end of the day from about 9 to 11 or 11 till 12, depending on the schedule. Then I'd get up in the middle of the night. I could never get anybody to do the nighttime chanting, 24-hour kirtan. especially from about 1 to 3. Nobody would do it, you just couldn't get them up. So I always ended up doing that myself. So I had this schedule where I get 2 hours sleep and then get up and go and do some service and then take another 2 hours and then, you know, get up again and then in the night time. So I'd be up around about 3 o'clock. I'd been chanting on my own for a couple of hours. We didn't have a big party like you have now. In the night time, the 24-hour kirtan meant one person for 2 hours. You would walk around the perimeter of the courtyard here with a tiny little pair of cartels and keep chanting and hope that you didn't fall asleep. So at the end of my nighttime stint chanting, then it was time for people to get up for Mangalarati. And we were quite strict about it. I had a register with everybody's names, and during Mangalarati I'd go around and I'd see who was there. If they were there, then I'd put a tick, and if they weren't there, then you didn't get any breakfast. That was it. You had to come to Mangalarati. If you didn't turn up, you didn't get any breakfast. I was told that Prabhupada knew about that and kind of approved of it. But the method that I had for making sure that everybody attended was a gong. You know, the big bang, bang, bang. And about 3:30 I would begin waking everybody up. And in those days, just above where Govinda's restaurant is now, there was this brahmachari ashram, 3 levels, this inner courtyard. So all the brahmacharis were there. There was no real room for any ladies or married couples, so temporarily they were being housed in the main guest house. So I'd start at 3:30 with the gong, bang, 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 and I'd walk around each floor. And then I would cross over into the guest house, because if we had any guests there, they must have thought that we were lunatics. And I'd banging and banging, and that would go on for about half an hour every morning until everybody was up. So apparently, when Prabhupada came for the Janmashtami festival, he had quite a big party with him. Brahmananda was the secretary, Upendra and Nitai Das were both on the party, and Navi Yogendra, I remember he flew in from Africa after about a week. He joined the party. Prabhupada kept hearing this racket going on in the morning. So Pendra told me that one morning he had called him in and asked him, what is that noise every morning? Bang, 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 bang. And I knew Pendra from 1972 in Sydney when I first joined. So he said, that's Hare Sauri Srila Prabhupada, he's the temple commander. He's waking everybody up for Mangalarati. So apparently Prabhupada said, he said they have to be herded like cows. So that was, one little connection that I had there with Prabhupada. The other one was not as auspicious. In the course of my temple commander duties, I got involved in a slight altercation. I was a very passionate guy in those days. And I got involved in a very slight, not very slight, but an altercation with a young Bengali fellow that came and visited, and it ended up a little bit messy and he got thrown out of the temple. So that was one morning, and then in the afternoon I got this knock on the door. I was up in my room in the ashram, and I opened it, and it was Upendra, and he said, Prabhupada wants to see you. And I was thinking, Prabhupada, well, why wouldn't Prabhupada want to see me? He doesn't hardly even know me. And then I was thinking, I hope it's not, something connected with this morning. Anyway, of course it was. And I got called into Prabhupada's room. He was there on his own. He had me sit down and then explain to him everything that had happened. There was a little provocation from the other side, but of course there was a massive overreaction from me. And at the end of it, after Prabhupada heard the whole story, he shook his head, he said, you have made a great offense. He said, now you have to go and find this boy and bring him back and apologize and bring him back to the temple. So that was it. So that was one of the first dealings, intimate dealings that I had with Srila Prabhupada, was to get chastised for making a great offense. It resolved itself. The next day, you know, in the afternoon, I got another knock on the door, and again, Prabhupada wants to see you. And I had not been able to find where this fellow was staying. Nobody knew who he was, so I was feeling, you know, complete depression. And now I'm going to have to go and tell Prabhupada that I couldn't, you know, fulfill his instruction. And I walked into his room, and this time there was about 50 or 60 people in there for darshan. And Prabhupada was talking, and he saw me at the back of the room coming in, so he called me over. So I went, you know, through all the people sitting there, got up to his desk, offered my obeisances. Then Prabhupada started to say something, and he was speaking directly at me. My brain was in such a fuzz, I couldn't hear a single word he was saying. I mean, he was speaking English, but it may as well have been Bengali or Hindi or whatever. I could not understand a single word. And I was really embarrassed. And Prabhupada could see I was completely blank. So he got a little bit frustrated. So he repeated it again, second time. And this time I really strained to listen very carefully to everything that he was saying. And I couldn't register a single syllable. Nothing. It was just like complete block. So Prabhupada just gave up. He turned to one of the older devotees, Pranab Gupta, who was involved in the management at that time. He said, "You tell him." So then he said, you know, this fellow that you know, hit yesterday, he's back. And then I hear this, "Oh, Prabhu, I'm so sorry." And this guy's sitting in the darshan, he pops up and he's all emotional and loud. And so he had apparently had second thoughts about the incident the day before and decided that actually it was really his own fault. So fortunately he came back on his own and apologized to Srila Prabhupada. So then Prabhupada had a basket full of fruit underneath his desk that somebody had donated. So he told me now, he said, "Take some of this fruit, go in the other room and apologize." And so we did and made it up, and that was it. So I have to say that my initial personal contact with Srila Prabhupada was not what you would call the most auspicious beginning of our relationship. But typically for Srila Prabhupada, later on, you know, at the end of the year, I did join his party. Prabhupada never ever mentioned the incident again, never. I think if, you know, I'd have repeated it, he probably would have. But that was very typical, that once something was done, it was gone. Shrudakirti knows. And you went on with your service. So for me, 1975 was, you know, quadruply auspicious. First time in India, first time in Vrindavan for the opening of the temple. Then I came back, I got service here as the temple commander, and then that led to taking up Prabhupada's personal service. So I don't think I ever had a better year than 1975, and I probably never will have. But anyway, so being with Prabhupada, of course, in Vrindavan, I think the most impression that I got was just his intense concern about the management. Management was always a big issue. I remember sitting in Prabhupada's room, one or two people were there, Akshayananda, maybe Gopal Krishna Maharaj was there, a couple of others, and then Prabhupada listed off about half a dozen men that had come here to Vrindavan, and, you know, as temple commander or as temple president, he'd listed, you know, several well-known names. And he said, and he quoted this verse, a Bengali verse, that everybody that goes to Lanka becomes a Ravan. So he said, this management in Vrindavan is like Ravan. Everybody that comes here to manage ends up like Ravana. Nobody can do it. So it was a big, big problem, always a big struggle. And there were a couple of little personal exchanges that I had that were really nice. We came in September of 1976, and Prabhupada stayed for 3 months. It was a long spell. We'd just come back from the West. And as usual, as soon as Prabhupada came to Vrindavan, he called in his managers and he wanted to know, what was going on and how much they were spending. And it was very apparent that things were not up to his standard. And for 2 or 3 weeks, he was pushing every day, constantly, asking about this, asking about that. They were spending 10,000 rupees a month total budget for the whole temple, which nowadays we think is nothing. But Prabhupada was so alarmed that he called Bagaji in. Bagaji was Vishwambhar Dayal. He lived around the corner. He donated the land for the Gurukul here. And he was intimately involved in the management affairs in Vrindavan. So Prabhupada called him in and they sat down together for a couple of hours and they worked out how much it cost to make 1 plate of prasadam for the deities. And, they calculated so much sabji, so much flour, how much a spoonful of ghee costs, how much it costs to make a single puri. And then, there were 10 plates that were being offered at that time on the altars, 2 and 4. So Prabhupada cut them down. Turiya's here, he knows he was a pujari at that time. And Prabhupada cut them down to 6 plates. And he told them there, he said, you can't spend more than 500 rupees a month. And they were spending 10,000. And Jayananda was like alarmed. So then Prabhupada gave him a concession. All right, up to 1,000, not more. So he was, delving into every aspect of the management, every little detail. And it was a big burden for Srila Prabhupada. And there was one afternoon we had a meeting, another management meeting. After about 45 minutes, Prabhupada suddenly sat back. He rubbed his head. He said, all right, he said enough. He said, now I'm getting brain fag. So I never heard that expression before, brain fag. So I said, brain fag, Srila Prabhupada? What's brain fag? So he said, brain fag. And then he told a little story about how he had been in Delhi, on his own, doing his Bhakti Godhead magazine, and he'd been out selling in the hot sun all day long. He said, and then suddenly he said, I developed brain fag. He said, and I was reeling like a drunkard. So he was falling down in the street from heat exhaustion. He said, just at that moment, one of my friends went past in a car. In the 1950s in Delhi, I mean, what's the chances of that? He said it was Krishna's arrangement. He saw me, he took me in his car, he took me to his home, gave me some medicine, said then I was all right. So that's brain fag. When your brain actually stops working. So even Prabhupada would complain sometimes that the management was so difficult. He would get this brain fag. So there was at that time, some differences of opinion about who should be the temple president here. Akshayananda Swami had been, and he wasn't, frankly, a good manager. He was a sincere man, but as Prabhupada said, yes, Prabhupada, yes, Prabhupada. We're all fools, Prabhupada. That was how he would, accept any criticism from Srila Prabhupada. He would agree, and he would accept and say, and Prabhupada said, well, why is it not done? Because we're all fools, Srila Prabhupada. Which might, technically be okay, but it didn't solve the problems. So, Akshayananda was one manager, then Gopal Krishna Maharaj. He was an adhikari at that time. Don't mind this, Maharaj. He was also involved as the GBC, and Prabhupada would sometimes mimic him that, oh, everything is so first class, Srila Prabhupada. I always remember this. He liked the, Vrindavan temple. It was an amazing achievement by Srila Prabhupada, so in his disciples' eye, everything was first class. So when Prabhupada had come in 1975 for his first visit back, after the opening, he'd gone away for a couple of months and then he came back. The first day that he was back, he'd gone on a morning walk, and then he came back into the temple. And he went into this corner room here, on the right here, as you come in, and sat down. And it was a kind of a bare room, and we tried to clean everything up. So Gopal Krishna Maharaj, he started telling Prabhupada, he said, oh Prabhupada, this temple's so wonderful, it's so first class. And Prabhupada pulled a sour face and he said, you say it is first class. He said, I say it is fifth class. And he looked up, and there's a chandelier in the middle of the room with a huge bird's nest hanging above his head. We hadn't seen it. Prabhupada sitting there looking like, this is first class. So, oh, okay, Ganana was just saying that Prabhupada said that I have to come thousands of miles here to tell you this. Anyway, so it was a problem. And then in 76, when we came in September, there was another personality that was added into the mix, and that was Hare Swami. And apparently, very briefly, he had also been one of the many temple presidents of early Vrindavan. And after a couple of months, he got moved out, and he never really understood why. So when he came back in 76, he was Prabhupada's secretary. And the secretary, of course, was intimately involved in managerial affairs and, you know, letting the local men know what Prabhupada's desires were and seeing that they were fulfilled. But he had this personal attachment to the management here as well, and I guess a little bit of ambition to be involved. And so he was a third personality in the mix. And Prabhupada was trying to figure out how to manage this place properly. And, you know, he'd been gone for several weeks trying to get things done, you know, at the right standard. There was a whole thing with the bell above the front entrance there, and getting the chowkidars to ring the bell every hour throughout the night, and that wasn't being done. And Prabhupada kind of took that as symbolic of the entire state of the management, that everybody was asleep. Prabhupada was trying to figure out now who would be the best manager. Now, another character that was here in 76 was Hamsadutta. And, you know, all glories to him. But he was another person that was very difficult to deal with. But he was very energetic, so he became the co-GBC in 76 here in Vrindavan, and he had his own idea and own style of what should be done. And of course we all knew he was very radical. So he was trying to basically push Akayananda out because he knew Prabhupada was not very happy with his management, and then, you know, take it up himself. And then he had Harikesh. He was another one that, you know, might be available. So like that. And my little role in it was that one night, after several weeks of these headaches, Prabhupada rang his bell at 1 o'clock in the morning. He was up on the roof in his room there, doing his translation. So I came up, offered my obeisances, and Prabhupada was sitting there, and he had a kind of a bit of a frown on his face. And he looked at me, he said, I want your advice. So I was thinking, me? How am I going to advise Srila Prabhupada? And I was embarrassed. So Prabhupada saw my hesitation. So he said, no, he said, after all, he said, you have got a British brain. So for Prabhupada, you know, managerial issues, his experience was that the British Raj were the best managers in the world, and I was British, so it made logic that you've got a British brain, you should know something about management. So when Prabhupada said that, then I realized, all right, I'm going to have to say something here. So I told him what I thought about each. He asked me, what do you think about Akayananda? What do you think about Hamsadutta? What do you think about Harikesh? Not Gopal. Gopal Krishna was okay, he was secure. But it was the local managers. And so I gave my humble opinion about each one. Prabhupada heard them very carefully. All right, thank you. And I went back to sleep. And then the next day, he actually followed my advice, and he switched them over, and he made Hamsadutta the temple president, and Harikesh was sent back to Europe. And Akayananda became Prabhupada's personal secretary. But that only lasted about 2 or 3 weeks. And then Hamsadutta made such radical changes, everybody came and complained, and then Prabhupada again had to switch them back again. So it was a huge endeavor always for Prabhupada whenever he came to Vrindavan to make sure that this place was managed properly. I mean, every little paisa had to be accounted for and spent in the proper way. And I think Gananava will probably tell you more about this, about the damn cheap babus. That we Westerners, we had so much money, more money than sense. He said, your money is burning your holes in your pockets. He said, you go somewhere and ask the price, they're charging you 5 times as much. And you say, oh, damn cheap. And you pay. He said, you have no common sense. So that was a well-known syndrome, damn cheap babu. So, Prabhupada was always anxious about, maintaining whatever he created. And there were many, we don't have time now, there were many, many other incidences you'll hear about from all the other speakers. I know another Leela that was fairly prominent was trying to get the deity worship done properly. And there were several times when we greeted the deities, they didn't have garlands. And even when they had garlands, they were really horrible. The flowers, we were getting cheated buying the flowers. The flower wallah would come and we would buy by the basket. So all the old stuff from the previous day that had not sold, that's what they were selling to us. And they would put bricks in the bottom of the basket to make them weigh heavier, because we bought by weight. And Prabhupada was the only one that actually figured it out. And sometimes, he would come and greet the deities and see they had no garlands. So he was getting more and more annoyed just by that one thing. Again, it was symbolic of a lot of other things that were going on. And I remember one particular morning, we greeted Krishna and Balaram, and again, no garlands. And then Prabhupada just turned around and he said, this is another farce. And he walked on. And then he gave this whole lecture about how, after I'm gone, he said, if there's no bhava, he said, this is the whole key to everything. There must be some bhava, some feeling of love for the deities. Otherwise, he said, you'll think that when the old man is gone, he's left us with this huge burden, galagra. Yeah, he said, it will be like a go-down, a giant go-down. Nobody will be interested, and everybody will think that we've been left with this burden. He said, unless there's some bhava. He said, unless that feeling is there, he said, nothing will go on. So I think in closing, it's getting a little late, I have to say that I'm very impressed with the current state of the temple here. I don't know about the intricate details of the management, but at least, so many devotees, so many books are going out, Prabhupada's Samadhi, so many people are coming to visit. And it's fulfilling this aim, this ambition that Prabhupada wanted some trained preachers to go out, spread the glories of Vrindavan Chandra all over the world. And this was going to be the center point for doing that. So although it's very small, physically, but spiritually it's unlimited. And this temple is being, reproduced all over the world, in all of the places where people are following Srila Prabhupada's instructions. Because that's our gateway into the Dham. Yeah, it's not a question of just coming here and sitting down and chanting, as Prabhupada used to say. You come here, you learn the philosophy. We should come here in the mood of the 6 Goswamis. When they came to Vrindavan, it was after renouncing everything. So Prabhupada was initially, at least, not in favor very much of the householders and certainly the younger single ladies coming and living in Vrindavan. But he said they can do so only if they work twice as hard as the others. Then they can stay. But he wanted that mood of the 6 Goswamis. This is a place of renunciation. And this is a place, as he says, where Krishna consciousness automatically reveals. Not just by sitting here, but actually doing service. Rendering service to the deities, going out and preaching, working very hard. At least my own feeling, having gotten the chance at the end of 75 to become Prabhupada's servant, very unexpectedly. I feel, looking back, was because I worked very hard for a couple of months as, you know, the temple commander here, and because of that, I got some benediction that I could travel with Srila Prabhupada. So, work hard, let's eat prasadam, dance, chant the holy names, and go out and spread Krishna consciousness as far and as wide as possible. And we're guaranteed that Prabhupada will reveal the Dham to us. That's all we need. So thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada.